It was the worst royal engagement I ever did, a royal wedding I ever did. I was there, hated the day. The day was a miserable.
What if everything you thought you knew about the royal wedding of the century was a lie? The man who's been behind the lens for every major royal moment over the past 40 years just dropped a bombshell that's leaving fans absolutely stunned. And trust me, you're not ready for what he's about to reveal. I'm talking about Arthur Edwards, the legendary royal photographer who's captured everything from Princess Diana's most intimate moments to Prince William's first steps. At 85 years old, this man has seen it all. He's been in rooms where history was made, stood feet away from kings and queens, and witnessed moments that shaped the modern monarchy. But there's one royal wedding he wishes he could forget. One day that still haunts him, and after decades of professional silence, he's finally ready to tell us exactly what happened behind those palace walls. So stick around, because what you're about to hear will completely shatter the fairy tale you've been sold. By the end of this video, you'll never look at that royal wedding the same way again. Before we dive into the explosive revelations, let me ask you something. Have you ever been to an event that looked absolutely perfect on social media, but felt like a complete disaster in person? Drop a comment below if that's ever happened to you, because that's exactly what Arthur Edwards experienced at what was supposed to be the wedding of the century. Now, who is Arthur Edwards, and why should you care what he thinks? This isn't just some random photographer with an opinion. Arthur Edwards is the royal photographer. For over 4 decades, he's been the Sun's royal correspondent, traveling the world with the royal family, documenting their lives, their triumphs, and yes, their struggles. He's photographed King Charles's weddings, Prince William's wedding, Princess Diana in her most vulnerable moments, and countless historic occasions that defined the British monarchy. When this man speaks, people listen. Why? Because he's earned the right to speak. He's not an outsider throwing stones. He's someone who genuinely cared about the royals, who built relationships with them, who understood the weight of their responsibilities. And that's what makes his recent confession so shocking. Because after traveling the world with Prince Harry, after capturing thousands of moments, after genuinely enjoying working with him for years, Arthur Edwards just said something that sent shockwaves through the royal community. I really don't care if I ever see him again. Let that sink in. A man who dedicated his life to photographing the royals, who watched Harry grow from a mischievous child into a prince, just publicly declared he's done with him. What could possibly have happened to make a devoted royal photographer turn his back on a prince he once admired? The wedding, everyone thought, was perfect. Let's rewind to May 19th, 2018. Do you remember where you were? Because I guarantee millions of people around the world were glued to their screens, watching what media outlets called the most modern royal wedding in history. The images were stunning, weren't they? Meghan Markle, former actress turned princess, walking down the aisle at St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle. The dress, the music, that gospel choir that had everyone talking. Prince Harry, beaming with what looked like pure joy. Celebrity guests everywhere you looked. Oprah Winfrey, George and Amal Clooney, the Beckhams, Serena Williams. Social media exploded. People were crying, sharing, posting about how beautiful it all was. This wasn't just a wedding, it was being sold as a cultural moment, a sign that the monarchy was evolving, that barriers were breaking down. But here's the question nobody was asking. What was it really like to be there, not watching from your couch with a cup of tea, not scrolling through perfectly curated Instagram posts, but actually there in Windsor, experiencing it firsthand? Arthur Edwards was there, and according to him, it was the worst royal engagement he'd ever covered in his entire career. Wait, what? The worst? How is that possible when everything looked so perfect on TV? This is where things get interesting, because what you saw on television was exactly what Meghan and Harry wanted you to see. The cameras, the angles, the editing, the carefully selected shots, it was all designed to project an image, and that image was pure fiction. Edwards describes the day as miserable, not disappointing, not underwhelming, miserable. Think about that for a second. This man has photographed royal events in scorching deserts, in freezing rain, during political tensions, and through personal royal dramas. He photographed Charles and Diana's wedding when the world was watching to see if the fairy tale was real. He was there when Diana died, capturing the nation's grief. He documented William and Kate's wedding, which drew billions of viewers. And yet, with all that experience, with all those historic moments under his belt, Harry and Meghan's wedding was the worst. How is that possible? What could make a professional who's seen everything describe a globally celebrated event as the lowest point of his career? The heat, the chaos, the reality. Let me paint you the real picture of what was happening at Windsor Castle that day while you were watching at home. Imagine you're a guest. You've been invited to a royal wedding, a once-in-a-lifetime honor, right? You've spent thousands on your outfit. You've traveled potentially from another country. You're excited, honored, ready to witness history. You arrive at Windsor Castle, and immediately something feels off. The heat is absolutely brutal. We're talking about the kind of heat that makes you regret every clothing choice you've ever made. And remember, this is a formal royal event. Men are in full suits, many in mourning coats. Women are in elaborate dresses, tights, heels, hats, the works. There's no such thing as casual at a royal wedding. Now, you'd think that for an event of this magnitude, with the resources of the British royal family at their disposal, there would be adequate planning for guest comfort, right? Fans, air conditioning, shaded areas, proper ventilation. Guests were essentially packed into St. George's Chapel like sardines, sitting for hours in stifling heat with no relief. Edwards describes people sweating through their designer outfits, makeup running down faces, guests desperately clutching fans like they were lifelines. Can you imagine? You've been honored with an invitation to a royal wedding. You've prepared for months, and you're sitting there actively trying not to pass out while cameras broadcast your supposedly joyful face to billions of people worldwide. One guest reportedly whispered that it felt less like a wedding, more like a survival challenge. But here's what really gets me. This wasn't an oversight. Royal weddings have dealt with unpredictable weather before. When William and Kate got married, there were contingency plans for every possible scenario. When Charles married Diana, despite the scale being even larger, guest comfort was considered. So, why did this wedding feel so careless? Edwards has a theory, and it's damning. It felt like the comfort of attendees didn't matter, only the optics for cameras broadcasting around the globe. In other words, as long as you at home saw beautiful shots of the ceremony, it didn't matter that the people actually there were suffering. The televised illusion was more important than the lived reality. Does that sound like a couple who cares about the people supporting them? Or does it sound like a couple who cares more about controlling their image? And we're just getting started with the problems. The seating scandal. Let's talk about something that really exposes the true priorities of this wedding: the seating arrangement. In royal protocol, seating isn't random. It's not first come, first served. There's a reason for the traditional order. It's about respect. Respect for service, for sacrifice, for the people who've dedicated their lives to the crown and country. Senior royals who've spent decades in service, military veterans who've served their nation, distinguished family members who've upheld royal duties through thick and thin. These people traditionally receive seats of honor. It's not about ego. It's about acknowledging that their commitment means something. So, where were these people seated at Harry and Meghan's wedding? Shoved to the back. Meanwhile, who was sitting in the prime front row seats? The ones that every camera would inevitably focus on? Celebrities, Hollywood actors, Oprah Winfrey, who, by Harry's own admission, had only met the couple once before the wedding. George and Amal Clooney, who had never even met them before. Celebrities and industry connections who had zero relationship with the royal family and zero understanding of what the monarchy represents. Arthur Edwards couldn't believe what he was seeing. He jokes that he needed a GPS to figure out where he was seated, his view almost completely blocked, treated like he didn't matter despite covering the royal family faithfully for 4 decades. Let me ask you something. If you were getting married, would you put strangers in the front row and push your family's closest friends and most devoted supporters to the back? Would you prioritize celebrities who barely know you over people who've been there your entire life? Of course not. Unless the wedding wasn't really about family or tradition or honoring the institution. Unless it was about something else entirely. Edwards calls it exactly what it was: showbiz rubbish. The message was crystal clear. Your decades of service don't matter. Your loyalty doesn't matter. Your sacrifices for the crown don't matter. What matters is which face will look best when the camera zooms in for a close-up that'll be shared on social media. This wasn't a royal wedding. It was a red carpet event disguised as a royal wedding. It was a Hollywood premiere staged at Windsor Castle, and everyone who truly cared about the monarchy could feel the difference. The guests whispered among themselves, shocked at the blatant disrespect. Some called it a networking stunt. Others were more blunt. This isn't Windsor Castle anymore. This is a glossy Hollywood awards show staged in royal clothing. Can you imagine how the senior royals felt watching this unfold? Decades of service, of putting duty above personal desires, of sacrificing privacy and freedom for the sake of the institution. All of it dismissed so that Meghan's celebrity friends could have Instagram-worthy seats. And trust me, it gets even worse. The photographer's nightmare. Now, let's talk about Arthur Edwards' actual job that day, the thing he's been doing professionally for over 40 years, taking photographs. At a royal wedding, the press photographers have a crucial role. They're not paparazzi trying to sneak shots. They're officially credentialed professionals tasked with documenting history for the public record. Their photos become the images that define the moment for generations to come. Think about iconic royal wedding photos you've seen: Charles and Diana on the balcony, William and Kate's kiss. These aren't accidental snapshots. They're the result of skilled photographers working in cooperation with the royal family to capture moments that matter. Arthur Edwards has photographed every major royal wedding for decades. He knows how it works. He knows the protocols, the angles, the moments to capture. He's a consummate professional who's never, and I mean never, failed to deliver stunning, publishable photos from a royal event. Until Harry and Meghan's wedding. First time in his entire career, Arthur Edwards couldn't get a single usable photograph published. Not one. Think about that. How is that even possible? Was it bad luck? Was it technical difficulties? Was it just an off day? No, it was deliberate sabotage. According to Edwards, Harry was determined to keep the newspapers away from as much as possible. Every shot was forced to be taken from absurdly long distances, requiring 800mm telephoto lenses, the kind of equipment you'd use to photograph wildlife from half a mile away. When photographers were allowed closer, they were positioned so poorly that their angles were completely blocked. Edwards describes being placed just 5 feet away at one point, but completely unable to get a clear shot because of deliberate obstructions. And then there's the most telling moment of all, the carriage ride. Traditionally, when newlyweds ride in the carriage through Windsor, they wave to the crowds, they smile at the cameras, they give photographers those iconic shots of royal joy. It's part of the pageantry, part of the public celebration. When Harry and Meghan's carriage passed Arthur Edwards, they deliberately looked the other way. Let me repeat that. They saw him, recognized him, and turned their heads away to avoid being photographed. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't shyness. This was a calculated middle finger to the British press. Edwards' reaction? For me, it was a disaster. Can you imagine dedicating your life to documenting the royal family? Traveling the world with them? Building relationships? Showing respect? And then being treated like an enemy combatant at what should be a celebration? Why would Harry do this? What was the point of humiliating the very people whose job it is to share royal moments with the public? Edwards knows exactly why. Harry was angry with us because some of the things that have been said about Meghan during the engagement were pretty harsh. So, instead of rising above it, instead of being the bigger person, instead of understanding that media scrutiny comes with the territory of being royal, Harry decided to weaponize his wedding. He turned what should have been a day of joy into a petty revenge plot against journalists who were just doing their jobs. And the result? The only royal wedding in modern history without quality photographic documentation. The only royal wedding where even the seasoned professionals came away empty-handed. Think about what that means for history. Think about what that means for the public who couldn't attend. Those photographs belong to the people, to the nation, to history. And Harry deliberately ensured they didn't exist. That's not protecting privacy. That's punishing the public. The reception disaster. If you thought the ceremony was bad, just wait until you hear about the reception. Royal wedding receptions are legendary. We're talking about tables groaning with exquisite food, champagne flowing freely, multi-course banquets that showcase the finest British cuisine. When the royal family hosts, they host. It's about abundance, celebration, grandeur, showing the nation and the world that this is a momentous occasion worth celebrating properly. William and Kate's reception? Spectacular. Multiple courses, incredible food, guests raving about the experience. Charles and Diana? Historic scale, no expense spared. Even minor royal weddings typically feature impressive spreads, So what did guests at Harry and Meghan's reception get? Finger food, canapes, tiny, minimalist portions that you could finish in 2 bites. I'm not exaggerating. Guests who had dressed in 1,000-pound outfits, who had traveled from around the world, who had sat through hours of ceremony in sweltering heat, were given what Edwards describes as glorified cocktail hour food, microscopic bites of avocado toast, macarons that wouldn't satisfy a child, portions so small that guests were genuinely confused about whether this was a joke or the actual meal. Can you imagine the conversations happening in hushed tones around that reception? Is there going to be a real dinner? I think this is the dinner. You've got to be kidding me. People were hungry. Not just disappointed, actually physically hungry at what was supposed to be one of the most lavish celebrations in recent royal history. Edwards is blunt in his assessment. The portions were pathetic. Nothing fitting for a monarchy built on tradition, scale, and spectacle. But here's what really bothers me. This wasn't about budget. The royal family wasn't suddenly broke. This wasn't about dietary restrictions or allergies. Those can easily be accommodated while still providing substantial food. This was a choice, a deliberate decision to prioritize aesthetics over substance, image over reality, Instagram worthiness over actual hospitality. The food was designed to look good in magazine spreads, minimalist, modern, chic, perfect for those glossy photos in Vogue and Harper's Bazaar, but completely inadequate for actually feeding people. And that's the pattern, isn't it? Over and over again, Harry and Meghan's wedding prioritized the performance over the reality. How things looked mattered infinitely more than how things actually were. The guests left hungry. Some were quietly furious. Others laughed it off. But you could tell they were disappointed. Many stopped for food on the way home from a royal wedding. When was the last time you heard of someone leaving a royal event needing to grab McDonald's? This wasn't just poor planning. This was a fundamental misunderstanding of what royal duty means. It's not about minimalist aesthetics and controlled branding. It's about service. It's about honoring those who've come to celebrate with you. It's about living up to the responsibilities that come with representing the crown, and on every level: comfort, seating, photography, hospitality. This wedding failed to live up to those standards. The breaking point. So, we've covered the wedding disaster. But remember, Arthur Edwards started this conversation by saying something even more shocking. I really don't care if I ever see him again, because the way he's behaved towards the king and our queen and his brother and his sister-in-law is appalling. That's not about the wedding anymore. That's about what came after. Let me ask you something. Have you ever had a friend or family member who slowly pushed everyone away, who cut off relationships one by one, who turned their back on people who loved them? How did that make you feel? Because that's exactly what Arthur Edwards has watched Prince Harry do to his entire family. After the wedding, things didn't get better. They got exponentially worse. Harry and Meghan began systematically distancing themselves from the royal family. Invitations to royal estates declined. Family gatherings skipped. Holiday celebrations absent. When they did attend events, they insisted on staying in hotels instead of royal residences, surrounding themselves with private security, maintaining complete control over their environment. The message was clear. We don't trust you. We don't want to be part of this family. We're separate from you. But the most heartbreaking part? The children. King Charles, grandfather to Archie and Lilibet, has barely seen his grandchildren. The same man who's waited his entire life to be king is now being denied the simple joy of knowing his son's children. Prince William's children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, don't know their cousins. They're growing up completely separate from Archie and Lilibet, missing out on the bonds that should define their childhood. Arthur Edwards calls it one of the saddest things of all. And he's right, because whatever issues Harry has with his family, whatever grievances he's holding on to, his children are paying the price. They're being deliberately kept away from their heritage, their family, their roots. And here's the crushing irony. Harry and Meghan talk constantly about the importance of family, about compassion, about connection. They give speeches about these values. They build their entire brand around being caring, empathetic people. Yet they're denying their own children relationships with their grandparents, their cousins, their family history. Edwards doesn't mince words. It's so unfair. The first time Queen Elizabeth saw a photo of baby Archie, Arthur Edwards showed it to her on his phone, not in person, not during a family visit, on a photographer's phone screen, like she was some random stranger scrolling through Facebook. How did it come to this? How did a prince who grew up understanding the importance of family duty decide that none of it mattered? And it gets worse. The Oprah bomb. If the wedding was a performance and the isolation was cruel, the Oprah interview was an absolute declaration of war. March 2021. Harry and Meghan sit down with Oprah Winfrey for a primetime special that would be broadcast around the world. The promotion promised truth, revelations, finally speaking their truth. What the world got was a carefully orchestrated public relations attack designed to paint the royal family as racist, cruel, and unfeeling, while positioning Harry and Meghan as innocent victims who'd suffered unimaginable hardship. Let me be clear. If someone experiences genuine racism or cruelty, they absolutely have the right to speak about it. That's not what I'm questioning here. What I'm questioning is the method, the timing, the intent. Arthur Edwards calls it exactly what it was, a stunt. Think about the context. By early 2021, Harry and Meghan had been in California for a year. They'd signed massive deals with Netflix and Spotify. They'd started building their brand as independent celebrities. But there was a problem. Their relevance was starting to fade. People were moving on. The constant victimhood narrative was wearing thin. They needed something big to recapture attention, to dominate headlines, to remind the world they existed. Enter Oprah. The interview was filled with bombshell accusations. Unnamed royal family members allegedly made racist comments about Archie's skin color. Meghan claimed she was suicidal and received no help. Harry suggested his family was trapped in the institution and he'd saved them by leaving. But here's what bothers me most. The accusations were vague enough to cast suspicion on everyone, while specific enough to cause maximum damage. No names were named, except eventually, through a miscommunication, Charles and Kate were cleared, leaving everyone else under suspicion. No context was provided. No opportunity for response was given. It was trial by media, accusation without evidence, condemnation without conversation, and the royal family couldn't respond. Royal protocol prevents them from engaging in public disputes. The Queen's policy has always been never complain, never explain. So they had to sit there, silently, while Harry and Meghan controlled the entire narrative on Oprah's couch, Does that sound like someone seeking healing and reconciliation? Or does it sound like someone seeking revenge and publicity? The timing alone is damning. Prince Philip, Harry's grandfather, was 99 years old and gravely ill in the hospital at the exact time this interview aired. The Queen was dealing with the impending loss of her husband of 73 years. William and Kate were managing their royal duties while supporting the family through crisis. And Harry chose that moment to detonate a public relations bomb that he knew would devastate his family and dominate global headlines. Edwards is clear about the impact. Families torn deeper apart, trust buried beyond repair, and centuries of royal dignity dragged into Oprah's backyard. But for Harry and Meghan, it didn't matter. The chaos guaranteed coverage. The coverage meant relevance, and relevance meant they could continue building their brand. The interview wasn't about truth. It was about profit, publicity, and maintaining their victim status to justify their choices. Ask yourself, if you genuinely wanted to heal relationships with your family, would you have a private conversation with them where everyone can share their perspective, or publicly accuse them of terrible things on international television while they're prevented by protocol from defending themselves? The answer is obvious. The pattern becomes clear. So, let's step back and look at the full picture Arthur Edwards is painting. The wedding that looked perfect on TV, but was actually a disaster for everyone there. The systematic isolation from family, the weaponization of media appearances, the public attacks disguised as truth-telling. Do you see the pattern? Everything, and I mean everything, is about control. Controlling the image, controlling the narrative, controlling who has access, controlling who gets photographed, controlling what the public sees versus what's actually happening. Arthur Edwards spent that first year working with Meghan and genuinely believed she was a great asset to the family. He watched her on royal tours across the country and thought she was incredible. So, what changed? According to Edwards, she wasn't the problem during that initial period. She was actually doing well at royal duties, but something shifted. Priorities changed. The focus moved from serving the institution to building a personal brand. Harry, who Edwards traveled the world with and really enjoyed working with, transformed into someone who treated loyal servants of the crown with contempt. Someone who viewed family obligations as optional. Someone who prioritized grudges over duty. Edwards is careful to note that he knew the family would be seething about the behavior. He knew the Queen would be hurt. He knew Charles would be devastated. He knew William would feel betrayed. And here's the thing that makes this all so tragic. It didn't have to be this way. Meghan could have been a genuine asset to the monarchy, an American actress bringing a fresh perspective, modern sensibilities, and a connection to audiences the royal family traditionally struggled to reach. That's valuable. Harry, the beloved spare, who connected with people in ways his brother never could, who brought warmth and relatability to royal duty. That's valuable, too. Together, they could have been transformational for the monarchy. They could have helped it evolve while respecting its traditions. They could have bridged old and new, British and international, duty and authenticity. Instead, they chose to burn it all down. Why? Because evolution requires patience. It requires compromise. It requires putting the institution above personal desires sometimes. It requires accepting that you're part of something bigger than yourself. And that's the one thing Harry and Meghan were never willing to do. The real victims. So, who are the real victims in all of this? Is it Harry and Meghan, who claim they were driven out by cruel treatment and media intrusion? Who now live in a California mansion with multi-million-dollar deals and complete control over their image? Or is it the family members who've been cut off? The grandparents who barely know their grandchildren? The cousins who'll grow up as strangers? The institution that's been publicly attacked by two of its own? Arthur Edwards knows exactly who's suffering most. The children don't get to see their grandfather. That's really so awful because they're not getting to meet their cousins and to know their cousins. Such a shame for them. Think about Archie and Lilibet growing up. They'll have no meaningful relationship with their grandfather, the King of England. They won't know their cousins George, Charlotte, and Louis, who are growing up as future leaders of the monarchy. They won't understand their heritage, their history, the weight of the legacy they're connected to, all because their parents decided that distance and control mattered more than family connection. And on the other side, King Charles, who waited his entire life to become king, is now dealing with the betrayal of his son while being denied access to his grandchildren. William, who's always been protective of his brother, has watched their relationship completely disintegrate. George, Charlotte, and Louis are missing out on relationships with their uncle, aunt, and cousins. The Queen, before she passed, spent her final years dealing with this family rift, this public humiliation, this attack on the institution she'd served for 7 decades. Who benefited from any of this? Who's better off? Nobody, except maybe Harry and Meghan's bank accounts. And that's what makes Arthur Edwards so angry. He watched someone he genuinely cared about transform from a likable prince into someone he doesn't care if he ever sees again. That's not a statement you make lightly. Edwards has photographed this family through scandals, divorces, deaths, and disasters. He's remained loyal, professional, and devoted through it all. For him to publicly declare he's done with Harry speaks volumes about just how badly Harry has behaved. The comparison to other royal weddings. Let's talk about what a royal wedding should be, according to someone who's photographed them all. Arthur Edwards lists the weddings he's covered with obvious fondness. I've done some really lovely royal weddings. I did both King Charles's weddings. I did William's wedding. I did Andrew's wedding. I did Sophie and Edward. You know, they were lovely occasions. What made those weddings lovely when Harry and Meghan's was the worst? It wasn't about budget or scale. Some of those weddings were smaller. Some had challenges, but they all had something Harry and Meghan's lacked. Respect. Respect for tradition. Respect for guests. Respect for the institution. Respect for the people serving the event. When William and Kate got married, they understood they were participating in something bigger than themselves. Yes, it was their day, but it was also a national celebration, a moment of unity for the country, a continuation of royal legacy. They smiled for cameras. They made sure guests were comfortable. They honored those who'd served the family. They fed people properly. They treated the press with professional courtesy. The result? A wedding that was genuinely joyful, that brought people together, that created lasting positive memories for everyone involved. Compare that to Harry and Meghan's wedding, which Edwards couldn't get out of Windsor quick enough. A professional whose job is to be at these events literally couldn't wait to escape. That's not about personal taste or preference. That's about fundamental respect versus fundamental disrespect. And it shows in the legacy. William and Kate's wedding is remembered fondly as a beautiful moment of celebration. Harry and Meghan's wedding is remembered as the beginning of the end, the first public sign that something was deeply wrong, that the fairy tale was actually a horror show in disguise. The aftermath. So, where are we now? Years after that disastrous wedding, Harry and Meghan are in California, still doing interviews, still releasing content, still playing the victim card while living in luxury most people can't imagine. The royal family is carrying on with duty, service, and tradition, dealing with the absence of two people who could have contributed meaningfully but chose not to. And Arthur Edwards? He's telling the truth about what he witnessed because someone needs to. The relationship between Harry and his family is reportedly non-existent. William and Harry, who were once incredibly close, now barely speak. Charles has extended olive branches multiple times, only to have them rejected or used against him in public narratives. The children, both sets, are growing up in completely separate worlds. One set is learning royal duty, public service, and the weight of legacy. The other set is being raised in Hollywood's bubble, surrounded by celebrity culture, and apparently taught that their family is the enemy. It's genuinely tragic, not in a dramatic, sensational way, but in a deeply sad, preventable way. Edwards mentions watching royal births over the years. William, Harry, George, Charlotte, Louis, and the joy of those moments when the family proudly shared their new additions with the world. William and Catherine especially. They made such an effort to show the whole world their new baby. Contrast that with Archie's birth, which Edwards calls another disaster, because I knew we were not going to get a picture of it. The secretiveness, the control, the denial of traditional moments that connect the monarchy to its people, it was all there from the beginning. The pattern was set early. Public duty and tradition don't matter. Only control matters. Only image matters. Only their narrative matters. What the silence meant. For years, professionals like Arthur Edwards maintained respectful silence about Harry and Meghan. Why? Because there's a code in royal circles. You don't publicly criticize. You don't air dirty laundry. You maintain dignity and discretion even when you witness things that disturb you. But there comes a point where silence becomes complicity, where allowing a false narrative to dominate becomes dishonest, where watching people you once cared about destroy relationships and institutions requires speaking up. Arthur Edwards reached that point. At 85 years old, he's earned the right to be honest. He's served the royal family faithfully. He's been professional even when treated poorly. He's given Harry and Meghan every benefit of the doubt. But watching the way they've treated the king, the queen, William and Catherine, watching them cut off family members, manipulate narratives, and prioritize fame over duty, was too much. His statement, "I really don't care if I ever see him again," isn't said with glee or satisfaction. If you listen to the interviews, there's genuine sadness in his voice. This is someone mourning the loss of a person he once respected, someone grieving the Prince Harry could have been, and that's what makes his testimony so powerful. This isn't coming from a hater or a tabloid journalist looking for clicks. This is coming from someone who wanted to believe in Harry and Meghan, who tried to see the best in them, who gave them chances to prove the critics wrong. And they disappointed him utterly. The fairy tale wedding was a lie. The victim narrative is a lie. The entire, carefully constructed image is a lie. What's true is what Arthur Edwards and others like him witnessed disrespect, manipulation, calculation, and the systematic destruction of family relationships for the sake of brand building and revenge. That's the real story. That's what happened behind those palace walls while you watched at home, thinking you were seeing a love story. Now you know the truth. So I'll leave you with this final question. Knowing what you know now, will you continue to believe the fairy tale, or will you trust the people who were actually there? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe Arthur Edwards, or do you still think Harry and Meghan are the victims they claim to be? And if this opened your eyes, hit that like button and subscribe, because there's so much more to this story that the mainstream media won't tell you. Thanks for watching. The truth matters, and sometimes it takes 85 years and a lifetime of service before someone's ready to tell it.